Welcome to Christ Point Oasis.
Welcome.
Yeah, we're just out taking a walk. It's a little bit gloomy outside.
It's still nice day for a walk.
It's still a nice day, you know. I mean, one thing about when it gets gloomy, we know that it won't last always.
There's always hope for sunny days.
There's always hope for a sunny day. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Talking about hope. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you just felt like giving up, you feel like losing hope. May have been circumstances, situations. You ever felt like that?
I think everyone has probably had a time in their life where they felt like that, me included.
I know it. But you know what? Even in the midst of consequences and struggle, the thing is God still always gives us messages of hope.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sometimes we even bring stuff on ourselves. Yeah, that's the bad part, is that we make mistakes. But I don't think we can ever make a mistake that leads us outside of hope. Yeah. So there's always hope. That's what we're going to talk about. So hang in there. We have a great lineup. There's going to be the Melody Airs, and the Melody Airs is going to be singing God is Able. And then put a little bonus one in there for you. A guy by the name of Curtis Williams. Curtis Williamson. Yeah, Curtis did our wedding, didn't he?
He was fabulous.
Yeah, he was fabulous. He actually did our wedding. And everybody thought he was Luther Vandross.
He did sound like him.
He sounded like him. They actually thought that was who was singing. But yeah, so then some people, they thought we were playing.
Recording.
Yeah, they thought we were playing the recording when actually it was Curtis. But anyway, so just enjoy. Be blessed, be blessed, be blessed. We're going to enjoy our walk, even though it is cloudy out.
I see the sun.
It's coming. Oh Lord, my God, when I hit on sometimes I wonder, consider all, when I look at the world thy hands you have made, I see the stars. Soprano sing, tell them that God is more than able. Alto, he is more than able. He is more than able. Tenor, we say God. Sometimes we reach points in our lives where we feel like giving up hope, especially during times of negative circumstances. And many times our humanity causes us to make decisions that we often regret. Sometimes we find ourselves in situations and circumstances that cause us to experience discomfort, experience distress. I don't know about you, but I've been in those kinds of situations. And I really understand that it's not the best place to be. But that's why I want to share with you this text, because I recognize that some of you may be there right now. In this text, we learn that God never robs us of hope, even when the worst of consequences have been reserved for us, simply because there are some consequences that we have to go through. But no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're experiencing, I want you to know that there is hope beyond times like these. You see, the text that I want to share with you is normally shared during the Christmas season. It's usually shared during a time when the family is all together and they're beginning to show care for one another. They're sharing with one another. A time of joy is a time of happiness. And during that time, you hear this text because many families begin to recognize the greatest gift that's ever been given to humanity. And that's the gift of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Now, at some point during this time, you'll usually hear these verses from Isaiah, the 9th chapter, and the verses 6, where it says, "For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace." You see, this was a message of hope to come. And the reason that I say that is because it came during a time of turmoil. You see, this message came at a time when God had already decided to allow his people to experience the consequence of their behavior. Yeah, this message of hope actually came when people were about to suffer the consequences for engaging in extreme immorality, committing objectionable human injustices, and for their guilt of unconscionable spiritual idolatry. It came at a time when they were morally weak, politically divided, emotionally discouraged. They were experiencing the plight of famine, the discomfort of sickness, the evils of warfare. It came while they were carrying self-imposed burdens that were both physically and psychologically too heavy for them to bear. But yet, the consequence of their behavior was not yet complete. Their punishment was not yet over. But still, in the midst of their painful situation, in the midst of their pondering their circumstance, we still begin to see God communicating messages of hope. That's the reason I chose this text today. You see, I believe that our contemporary world and the circumstances that we're facing are basically very similar to the time that Isaiah actually uttered these words. You see, this text is actually a prophetic judgment against a kingdom that had been divided politically for over 210 years and was on the brink of destruction simply because they wouldn't stop with their foolishness. You see, if they only had stopped, God would have stayed their sentence. But I remember an older man told me, the longer you stay in a rut, the deeper it gets. You see, this message that I'm reading to you and we're studying today, it really didn't reverse anything as far as their consequence. But it does offer incentive never to give up on God. I believe that this message lets you know that even though hardship exists and hardship may still come, God is honorable, God is faithful, and God is true to keeping his promises. In essence, the people of each segment, the northern and southern kingdom, they were embracing ignorance. They were embracing ungodliness that ultimately led to disfavor with God. But the message that he communicates through Isaiah here is that his disfavor would only be for a season. You see, even though Israel was being chopped down, that was the metaphor, chopped down to a burned stone, because of their injustice and their immoral pagan tendencies, God still promises to lead a holy seed, a small shoot of new growth that would come from that stump to become the future Messianic King, Emmanuel, God with us. You see, sometimes God will chop you down, but even though he may chop you down, when we begin to go outside of his will and function in ways that he didn't create us to function, even though he may chop us down, he doesn't expect us to stay down. You see, a righteous man may fall 7 times, but he's going to get up the 8th. And the reason is because God will make a way for you. God will make a way for you to stand if you just humble yourself and turn to him. So in this section, he gives a brief vision of hope in the midst of judgment. In fact, in verse 1, he says, "Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress." In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future, he will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of sea beyond the Jordan. God assures them at some point in the future that the gloom will pass and the people will no longer be distressed. God had humbled them by allowing parts of their nation, the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, to be run over and to be invaded by Gentiles, to be treated with contempt. He allowed that, but he points them to a time when the areas that had been disparaged will begin to produce something that will bring honor. I think you might be able to relate to this, because there may have been times in your life when you were run over, when you were invaded, when you were treated with contempt because of where you were at certain point in time. But you waited on God. And when he was ready, God worked in you to bring to completion that which was lacking in you. And he produced within you something that's worthy of glory and honor. That's what kind of God we have. In other words, I'm telling you, even if he hasn't gotten you there yet, God is not finished with you. Your day is coming. Now in verse 2, he promises that the light of a new day will replace the darkness of oppression. Great light is a metaphor for hope. It's hope for those who are in darkened circumstances. When your environment is dark, you know what? You should look for messages of hope. Because messages of hope is that which can enable your vision. You see, if you have no vision, then you'll cast off discipline. You'll cast off restraint. And you'll move down a path of self-destruction. But if you have vision, you'll have more power to endure your trial. In fact, even in your trial, you can count it all joy. Because instead of looking through the blinders of circumstance, you can focus on the blessings of perseverance. You'll hang in there. You see, when you look through the eyes of faith, you'll see that God really wants to make you better. God really wants to make you greater. And God really wants to make you happier. The text says, "You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy." They rejoice before you as people. Rejoice at the harvest, as warriors rejoice when dividing the plunder. So in this message of hope to come, God communicates that upon your return, you're going to rejoice like you do when you receive a good return on your investment. In common terms, he says that you're going to rejoice before him like someone who just won $1 million jackpot.
That's awesome. Now the reason for this level of rejoicing is because God promises to shatter the chains of those who bind you. He promises to destroy the weapons of those who seek to oppress you. He promises to make the battle his and not yours. In fact, you'll be able to burn your battle attire because you'll be studying war no more. In the text he says, for as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. Now the question is, what brought about this freedom from distress? What brought about this freedom from gloom? What enlightened their eyes to be able to see hope? Who caused them to rejoice as beneficiaries? And I believe the answer to that question is verse 6. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given. And the government will be on his shoulders. You see, this prophecy is to the people of Israel. And the people of Israel have been espoused to God as a wife. And so therefore, to us, Isaiah says, his people, a child is born. A son. He's not just any child, but he's a son. And this son will rule the entire earth as a conquering king. He'll subdue all of the spiritual foes, even Satan, the god of this world, who seeks to corrupt it. He's the emancipator who lives to save. Now the problem with Israel is that she's adulterous. She's unfaithful. She's been tricked, beaten, and taken advantage of. She trusts in the trinkets promised to her by her lover, who seduced her by her own desire for pleasure, pride, and position. But she ends up only tricked, trapped, and enslaved by her own lustful desire for self-satisfaction. But God says a child is born. He'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. You see, the King of the universe loved Israel enough to produce a child, to produce a son who would rule in true holiness. He'll be like no other ruler that Israel and Judah has ever seen. In fact, his leadership is flawless. Solomon may have had a reputation to be a good counselor, but only Jesus is the wonderful counselor. Many kings and many pharaohs attempted to exalt themselves as God, but only Jesus in his very essence was the mighty God, the everlasting Father. Temporary peace may have come when Solomon became king, but even Solomon couldn't hold a stick to Jesus because he alone is our peace. For he is the Prince of Peace. He is our Irene, which is the Greek word for peace, because we have rest from external disruption and our enemies can't defeat us. He is our Shalom, the Hebrew word for peace, because we have an absence of internal turmoil, because we know that he got us covered. So peace is the remarkable nature of his kingdom, but also the duration of his reign is eternal. You see, nothing can prevail against his kingdom. Nothing can prevail against his reign. Not even death or the Hadean world that once had us overpowered. Nothing can stop us, and nothing can tear it down, simply because it's not made with hands. You see, the character of his kingdom is unlike any other kingdom on the face of this earth. And the reason is because it's founded on justice and it's empowered by righteousness. You see, Jesus has no personal agenda. The only agenda that he has is love. And love is not selfish. Love is fair. And love does good to everyone. You see, the reason that God had this type of interaction, made this kind of promise to Israel, is because God can't break a promise. You see, God had promised David that his descendants would rule. He had promised Jacob, Israel. He had promised Isaac. He had promised Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation, and through your seed, all nations will be blessed. Now, the reality of this kingdom is the zeal that God has for it, the zeal of the Lord. Yeah, he's passionate about doing this. He's passionate about saving his people. God is not willing that any should perish. God just wants us to come to repentance. You see, God is not happy when we face consequences. And God definitely is not happy when we face negative times like these. So if you're ever in a situation where everything seems hopeless, a situation where the outlook seems dark and bleak, one where all the voices around you are only communicating gloom and doom, or you're in a situation where you feel that there's nothing can be done to fix it, rather than letting that situation sap your energy, rather than allowing it to cause you to plunge into depression, rather than allow it to even make you give up, I want you to remember that God has given us hope in Jesus Christ. So even in the midst of your difficult circumstances, I want to share with you that God is faithful. He'll never leave us hanging. He'll always leave us messages to help us to know that he's there even when we suffer. When we experience negative consequences in our lives, God still loves us and cares for us. He has his hand stretched out. And no matter how far you go, no matter how bad you get, no matter what kind of circumstance you find yourself dealing with, no matter what kind of consequence you have to endure, there's still hope in God. Now that's the message. The message is that there is still hope in God. There's still hope in God, even in the midst of pandemic. There's still hope in God, even in the midst of political division. There's still hope in God, even through times of sickness. There's still hope in God, even though we're experiencing negative consequences, even of our own making. There's still hope in God. There's always hope in God, because ultimately God is working in all things for the good of them that love him and are called according to his purpose. So therefore, let me leave you with this message. There's always hope in God.